I parked my car 2 blocks away from the restaurant, finding a tight spot in a dimly lit alley where the shadows would hide the rust spots on my bumper. The engine of my 2012 sedan rattled violently, coughing one last time like a dying animal before finally shuddering into a shaky silence. I gripped the steering wheel for a moment, just breathing, trying to steady my nerves. I didn't want the valets at L'Orangerie to sneer at the duct tape holding the side mirror together or the way the muffler shook when the car idled. Tonight was supposed to be perfect. It was our 3-year anniversary, and I knew exactly how much appearances mattered to Vanessa. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, my thumb hovering over the banking app. I had been refreshing the page every 10 minutes for the last 8 hours, hoping for a miracle. My stomach tightened into a knot. Still nothing. The notification tray was empty, and the balance remained stubbornly low. I let out a long, shaky sigh and shoved the phone back into my pocket. I couldn't let Vanessa see me stressed. Not tonight. My name is Terrence, and for the last few years, I've been the guy in the background. I drive a beat-up car, I wear shirts that I've owned since college, and I spend my nights staring at lines of code that look like nonsense to everyone else. To the world, and especially to my girlfriend, I'm just a guy who refuses to grow up and get a real corporate job. But what nobody knew, what even Vanessa refused to believe, was that the algorithm I was building in my living room had been approved this morning. I had signed the papers at 9 a.m. Now, I was just waiting for the clearinghouse to press the button that would change my life forever. The air inside L'Orangerie smelled like expensive perfume, buttered lobster, and old money. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim, but the diamonds on the patrons' fingers sparkled brightly enough to light the room. Soft jazz played from invisible speakers, and the clinking of crystal glasses sounded like music. I smoothed down the front of my jacket, feeling instantly out of place. My suit was clean, but the cut was outdated, and the fabric didn't have that rich, silky sheen that the other men's suits had. I felt like an imposter walking through the dining room. I spotted Vanessa immediately. She was sitting at a prime booth near the floor-to-ceiling window, looking absolutely stunning in a red silk dress that probably cost more than the Kelly Blue Book value of my car. She was scrolling on her phone, her brow furrowed in annoyance, her posture rigid. I checked my watch. I was 3 minutes late. "Happy anniversary," I said, sliding into the booth and reaching for her hand across the white tablecloth. She didn't look up immediately. When she finally did, her eyes swept over me, landing critically on my chest. She pulled her hand away before I could really hold it, as if my touch might wrinkle her skin. "You're late, Terrence," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut. "And that tie? Really? We're at L'Orangerie, not a high school debate club. You look like you're going to a funeral." I felt my face heat up. "I'm sorry about the traffic. The bridge was backed up. And I thought this tie was classic." She scoffed and took a sip of a complicated-looking cocktail with a gold garnish. "It's tired. Just like your excuses. I already ordered a drink. It's $30, by the way. Try to look like you can afford it when the waiter comes back." I swallowed the lump in my throat and tried to smile. I wanted to tell her that soon, $30 for a drink wouldn't matter. I wanted to tell her about the lawyers, the contract, the potential life we were about to step into. But before I could open my mouth, the host appeared at our table holding 2 extra leather-bound menus. I looked at him confused. "Oh, sorry, there must be a mistake. It's just the 2 of us tonight. We didn't ask for extra settings." Vanessa cleared her throat loudly, demanding my attention. "Actually, it's not a mistake." I froze, looking at her. "What?" "I invited Chloe and Mark," she said, waving her hand casually toward the entrance. "I called the maitre d' this morning and upgraded our table to a party of 4. I knew you wouldn't mind. A dinner for 2 can get so stagnant after 3 years. Stagnant. The word hit me like a slap. Before I could process that she had turned our romantic anniversary into a group event without asking me, I saw them walking toward us. Chloe, Vanessa's best friend who judged people by their handbag labels, and Mark, a loud investment banker who loved the sound of his own voice. They walked over beaming. "Happy anniversary," Chloe chirped, sliding into the booth next to Vanessa. Mark squeezed in next to me, clapping a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Terrence, my man," Mark boomed. "Hope you brought the big wallet tonight. This place doesn't do payment plans." I looked at Vanessa, hoping she would offer to split the bill since she invited them. Instead, she smirked. "Don't worry, Mark. Terrence has been saving his pennies for months for this night. He's not going to embarrass me by being cheap. Are you, Terrence?" The dynamic of the table shifted instantly. I was no longer a boyfriend celebrating a milestone. I was a spectator at someone else's party. A party I was expected to finance. Mark immediately took control of the conversation, leaning back and spreading his arms wide, taking up half of my physical space. "So, I finally picked up the new Porsche yesterday," Mark announced, making sure his voice carried to the nearby tables. "Turbo S. The handling is insane. You have to feel the leather, Terrence. It's German engineering at its finest." "That's amazing, babe," Chloe cooed, leaning on him and admiring his watch. "You should see it, Terrence," Mark continued, grinning at me with predatory amusement. "Although I guess you're still driving that. What is it? A 2012 Honda? That thing sounds like a lawnmower with a loose screw." "It gets me from A to B," I said quietly, picking up the menu to hide my face. I scanned the prices and felt a cold sweat start on the back of my neck. The appetizers alone were $50. I did the math in my head. If I ordered the roasted chicken and skipped a drink, and if they ordered reasonably, I could make rent this month without dipping into my emergency savings. "I think I'll have the chicken," I mumbled when the waiter arrived, closing the menu quickly. I felt a sharp kick under the table. Vanessa was glaring at me, her eyes wide with warning. "Don't be cheap, Terrence," she hissed under her breath. Then she turned to the waiter with a bright, fake smile. "Ignore him. We'll do the seafood tower for the table. The extra large one. And a bottle of your vintage Dom Perignon. The 2008. My heart hammered against my ribs. That order alone was nearly $1,000. The waiter left, looking pleased with the upsell, while I sat there feeling like the walls were closing in on me. I took a sip of water, trying to steady my shaking hands. I couldn't cause a scene. Not here. Not tonight. I just had to survive the meal. If the bank transfer cleared by morning, this debt wouldn't matter. But right now in this chair, I was drowning. "So Terrence," Chloe said, her voice dripping with mock curiosity as she buttered a roll. "Are you still playing around with that little computer thing at home? What is it again? A video game you're making?" I set my glass down carefully. "It's not a game, Chloe. It's a cybersecurity algorithm designed to detect polymorphic malware in real time for defense grids. It learns as it fights." The table went silent for a second. Then, Vanessa burst out laughing. "Oh, stop it," she giggled, rolling her eyes. "Don't ask him, Chloe. It's embarrassing. He sits in the dark all day typing nonsense. I tell people he's consulting, but honestly, it's just a hobby that got out of hand." "Right?" Mark chimed in, smirking. "You know, Terrence, in the real world, we call that unemployed. I just closed $1 million merger this morning before breakfast. Real money, real assets. Not imaginary internet codes." "Exactly," Vanessa said, turning her back to me to face Mark. "Mark is actually building a future, Terrence. He's looking at penthouses downtown. Meanwhile, you're still debugging code in your underwear while I pay for the Netflix account." The table erupted in laughter. I stared at the white tablecloth, my jaw clenched so hard my teeth hurt. They weren't just teasing me. They were enjoying it. The massive seafood tower arrived, a spectacle of crushed ice, massive lobster tails, and dozens of oysters that took up almost the entire table. As the waiter set it down, Mark and Chloe immediately pulled out their phones, snapping photos with the flash on, temporarily blinding me. I sat back, wiping a spot of condensation off the table, and decided to try one last time. I wanted to be part of the conversation. I wanted to show them I wasn't just a ghost in a cheap suit. "Actually, speaking of code," I said, leaning forward slightly, "the project I'm working on has some serious applications. I signed some preliminary papers this morning with a major government defense contractor. They think the predictive model could." "Boring," Mark interrupted, waving a dripping lobster claw in the air like a conductor's baton. "Terrence, buddy, nobody wants to hear about the robotic apocalypse while they're eating shellfish. Let's talk about something real. Vanessa, tell them about the gala next week." I shut my mouth, the words dying in my throat. Vanessa didn't even look at me to apologize for the interruption. She just turned her entire body toward Mark, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "Oh, the gala," she exclaimed, letting out a laugh, a light, bubbly sound I hadn't heard her use with me in months. "It's going to be the event of the season. Black tie, red carpet, the mayor will be there. Mark, you have to get us into the VIP lounge." I watched her hand brush lightly against Mark's arm as she laughed at his joke. I was sitting right there, less than 2 feet away, but I felt like I was watching them through a television screen. I had become background noise in my own relationship. The second bottle of champagne arrived before the first one was even finished. I watched the waiter pop the cork, the sound echoing like a gunshot in my anxious mind. I did a quick mental calculation as the golden liquid frothed into the glasses. The seafood tower was 300. The champagne was another 400, easy. Plus appetizers. Plus the entrees that were still coming. I slipped my hand into my pocket and unlocked my phone under the table, dimming the brightness all the way down. I opened my banking app. The balance stared back at me in cruel, black numbers. $1,450.22. That was everything. That was rent, utilities, and groceries for the next month. If this bill went over 1,000, I was going to be eating instant noodles for 4 weeks. My chest tightened. It was a familiar burn, the hot, heavy weight of shame. I looked at Mark, who was casually tossing back oysters without a care in the world. He didn't have to count pennies. He didn't have to check his balance before ordering a drink. "You're not drinking, Terrence?" Chloe asked, raising an eyebrow as she swirled her flute. "It's vintage. Don't tell me you're saving room for the tap water." "I'm driving," I lied, my voice sounding thin even to my own ears. "Suit yourself," she smirked. "More for us." I took a sip of my water, feeling small. In their eyes, I wasn't just broke, I was a failure. And sitting there, unable to even pay for my own anniversary dinner without panicking, I was starting to believe them. The main courses arrived, but I had lost my appetite. I pushed the roasted chicken around my plate, staring at the glaze. Vanessa noticed. She set her fork down with a sharp clatter that made me jump. She didn't look concerned, she looked exhausted. "You're doing it again," she said, letting out a loud, dramatic sigh. "Doing what?" I asked, looking up. "Sulking," she snapped. "You're sitting there with a long face, bringing down the entire mood. This is exactly why I didn't want to bring you to the gala next week. I knew you'd just stand in the corner and embarrass me." The table went quiet. Mark and Chloe exchanged a look, not of discomfort, but of amusement. They were enjoying the show. "I'm not sulking, Vanessa," I said, keeping my voice low so the nearby tables wouldn't hear. I'm tired. And I didn't know this was going to be a group event." "Oh, please," she rolled her eyes. "Everything is always a problem with you. I try to include you in my life. I try to introduce you to successful people, and you just act like a victim. It's exhausting, Terrence. Truly." The hostility wasn't hidden anymore. It was out in the open, sharp and jagged. She wasn't just annoyed with me, she was repulsed by me. The mask had fully slipped, and I realized this dinner wasn't a celebration. It was a setup. Vanessa took a long, fortifying sip of her wine, gathering her courage, or maybe just her audacity. She turned to face me fully, ignoring the food in front of her. The air around the table grew thick. This was it. The talk. "You know, Terrence," she began, her tone conversational but cold. "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately. About us. About where I'm going and where you're staying." Mark smirked and took a bite of his steak. Chloe leaned her chin on her hand, watching us like it was a reality TV finale. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "I'm saying I think I've outgrown this relationship," she said flatly. "Look at us. Look at this table. I belong in places like this. I thrive here. You look like you're waiting for permission to leave." She gestured vaguely at my suit, my face, my entire existence. "It's not just the money, Terrence. It's the ambition. You have none. You're 30 years old, and you're driving a rust bucket. You have no status, no future. You're content being a nobody, and I simply can't be anchored down by that anymore." My heart hammered in my chest. "Vanessa, you know how hard I'm working. The algorithm." "The algorithm," she interrupted, throwing her hands up. "Stop talking about the algorithm. It's a pipe dream, Terrence. It's an excuse to avoid getting a real job. You're living in a fantasy world, and I need a man who lives in reality." Her voice had risen. It wasn't a scream, but it was loud enough to carry. The chatter at the nearby tables died down. Heads turned. A couple at the next booth stopped eating to watch. Vanessa didn't care. In fact, she seemed to feed off the attention, posturing for the audience. "I need a man, Terrence," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "I need a partner. Someone who challenges me. Someone who brings something to the table besides debt and awkward silence. I don't need a project." She leaned in, pointing a manicured finger at me. "That's all you are. A fixer-upper house that I've been pouring time into for 3 years, and the foundation is still cracking. I'm done renovating." I felt the eyes of the room on me. The waiters were pausing near the kitchen doors. The rich patrons were whispering behind their napkins. I was the spectacle. The broke boyfriend getting dumped in the fancy restaurant. Inside, I felt a mix of humiliation and a strange, cold calm. I didn't yell back. I didn't beg. I pulled my phone from my pocket and set it face up on the white tablecloth, screen dark, not caring anymore if they saw the cracked screen protector. I just sat there silently, hands folded in my lap, staring at the phone. I took the abuse. I let her say every hateful word she had stored up. Because I knew something she didn't. I just needed one vibration. Just one notification. Vanessa leaned across the table, closing the physical distance between us but widening the emotional gap to an ocean. Her eyes were hard, devoid of any warmth or history we'd shared over the last 3 years. She wanted to make sure I understood exactly where I stood in her hierarchy. "Let's be honest, Terrence," she said, her voice dropping to a cruel, theatrical whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "You're a loser. You've always been a loser. You were a loser when I met you, and I thought I could change you, but clearly it's genetic." She picked up her wine glass, swirling the dark red liquid. "I can't date a loser anymore. I'm doing myself a favor, and honestly, I'm doing you a favor by ending this charade tonight. You need to find someone on your level. Someone who likes coupons and camping." Mark chuckled, a low, ugly sound in his throat. Chloe covered her mouth to hide a smile. They weren't just witnessing my destruction, they were cheering for it. The word loser hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was the final nail. The verdict had been delivered. The restaurant was deadly quiet now. The clinking of silverware had stopped. The hum of conversation had vanished. Everyone was waiting for my reaction. Was I going to cry? Scream? Flip the table? I felt the urge to apologize rise in my throat, a reflex honed by years of trying to keep the peace. I opened my mouth to say, "I'm sorry you feel that way," but the words never came out. Zim. Zim. Sim. The sound was jarring in the silence. My phone, which was sitting face up near the salt shaker, buzzed loudly against the wood. It wasn't a short notification chirp. It was a long, sustained vibration that seemed to resonate through the table, demanding attention. Zim. Zim. Sim. The screen lit up. In the dim, ambient lighting of the restaurant, the backlight was blindingly bright. A single banner notification slid down from the top of the screen, staying there, glowing white against the dark background. I stared at Vanessa, my face impassive. I ignored the phone completely. I didn't reach for it. I didn't look down. I just held her gaze, letting her insult hang in the air between us. But Chloe couldn't help herself. She was sitting directly across from me, and the bright light of the screen caught her eye. She glanced down instinctively. She leaned over the table, squinting to mock me, but her eyes caught the text on the glowing screen. Her eyes narrowed, then suddenly went saucer-wide, like a cartoon character. She gasped, a sharp, audible intake of breath. She nudged Mark hard in the ribs with her elbow. "Ah, what?" Mark grumbled, annoyed at the interruption of the drama. "Look," Chloe whispered, her voice trembling. She pointed a shaking finger at my phone. Mark frowned, looked down, and froze. His fork hovered halfway to his mouth, a piece of steak falling off the tines and hitting his plate with a dull thud. His jaw literally dropped. Vanessa noticed the shift immediately. The spotlight had moved from her face to the table. She looked annoyed that her grand finale was being interrupted by a text message. "What?" she snapped, looking from Mark to Chloe. "What are you two staring at?" She looked down at the phone. The screen was still glowing, the notification banner bright against the dark lock screen. She squinted, reading the text aloud, her voice trembling. "Bank alert. Wire transfer received. Available balance, $12,501,450.22. She blinked. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear a smudge from her vision, and read it again. $12,500,000. The numbers were crisp, clear, and undeniable. The silence at the table changed texture instantly. Before, it was the awkward, heavy silence of public humiliation. Now, it was the dense, suffocating silence of shock. It felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the booth. Vanessa stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked at the number, then up at my face, then back down at the number. Her brain was trying to reconcile the loser she had just described with the 8-figure sum glowing on the table. It didn't compute. "Is that?" she stammered, her voice cracking. She cleared her throat and tried again, softer this time. "Is that a glitch? Is your phone broken?" She looked at me with pleading eyes, begging me to tell her it was a spam text, a prank, a mistake. Anything but the truth. Because if it was the truth, she realized with dawning horror, she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. I reached out and picked up the phone. My hand was steady, a stark contrast to the trembling fingers Vanessa was pressing against her wine glass. I didn't rush. I unlocked the screen, tapped the banking app, and let it load the full dashboard. The balance was there in bold, green numbers, sitting quietly next to my checking account that still had less than $2,000 in it. "It's not a glitch," I said calmly. My voice sounded loud in the hushed restaurant. "I signed the acquisition papers at 9 a.m. this morning. I was just waiting for the funds to clear." I looked at Mark, whose face had gone pale. "My little coding project was just acquired. The defense contractor bought the exclusive rights to the algorithm for their cybersecurity division. It's a full buyout." I turned the phone around so they could see the breakdown. The numbers were undeniable. It wasn't just a lottery win. It was a business transaction. It was validation. "It's 12.5 million, I said, sliding the phone back into my pocket. "Before taxes, of course. But I think I'll manage." Mark looked like he was going to be sick. He knew exactly what kind of capital gains were involved. He looked at me with a mix of envy and fear, realizing he had just spent an hour mocking a multimillionaire. The transformation in Vanessa was almost instant. It was like watching a light switch flip. The anger, the disgust, the tough love attitude, it all evaporated. In its place, a wide, desperate smile stretched across her face. Her eyes, which had been cold and hard seconds ago, suddenly welled up with fake tears. "Oh my God! Terrence," she gasped, bringing her hands to her mouth. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." She laughed, a frantic, high-pitched sound. "Why didn't you tell me? You had me so worried. I was just pushing you, you know. I was being hard on you because I knew you had greatness in you. I wanted to motivate you to finish that deal." She reached across the table, her fingers grasping for my arm. "This is amazing, babe. We did it. All those late nights, all the sacrifices, it finally paid off for us." "Us?" I repeated, looking at her hand on my sleeve. "Of course us," she beamed, ignoring the ice in my tone. "We need to celebrate. Forget the gala, we should go to Paris. Or maybe look at that condo downtown that Mark was talking about. We can finally start our life, Terrence." She was rewriting history in real time, trying to erase the last hour with a smile. I looked at her hand on my jacket, the same jacket she had called embarrassing 20 minutes ago. I felt absolutely nothing. No love, no anger, just a profound sense of clarity. I stood up slowly. The chair scraped against the floor, a final sound that signaled the end of the show. "You were right, Vanessa," I said, my voice steady and clear. She blinked, hopeful. "I was." "Yes," I nodded. "You said you can't date a loser. And you were right. You shouldn't." I looked her dead in the eye. "But you were wrong about who the loser is. I can't date someone who only respects me when there is a comma in my bank account. I can't be with someone who needs a wire transfer to see my worth." "Terrence, stop," she said, her smile faltering. "You're just being emotional. Sit down." "I'm not emotional," I said. "I'm done. You wanted a man with status. You wanted a man with money. Well, now I have both. And the first decision I'm making as a successful man is to remove the dead weight from my life." I pulled my arm away from her grip. "We're finished, Vanessa. Permanently." Panic flashed in her eyes. She stood up, reaching for me again, desperate to keep the golden ticket from walking away. "Sit down, babe, please," she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. "Let's just talk about this. Let's celebrate. We can work this out." I stepped back, out of her reach. I raised my hand and signaled the waiter, who had been hovering nervously nearby. He rushed over, looking between the untouched food and the tension at the table. "Check, please," I said. "Right away, sir," the waiter said, reaching for his tablet. "Actually," I interrupted, pointing a finger at my plate. "Split the bill, please. I will pay for the roasted chicken and my water." The waiter hesitated, looking back at the open bottles of champagne. "Sir, typically for a single party our policy is 1 check per table. I can't just—" "I am paying for what I consumed," I said, my voice leaving no room for argument. "The lady and her guests will cover the rest. Run the card, please." Vanessa's face went white. Mark choked on his water. They all knew exactly how much that bill was. And based on what Mark did next, it was clear that his wealth was just as fragile as their friendship. I tapped my card against the waiter's digital terminal, paying my $40. I added a generous tip for the awkwardness he had to witness. "Thank you," I said to him. "Terrence, you can't leave me with this." Vanessa shrieked, the facade completely gone now. This bill is nearly $2,000. I can't pay this. You should have thought about that before you ordered the vintage bottle, I said, buttoning my jacket. Maybe Mark can help. He just closed a big deal, right? I looked at Mark. He immediately looked up at the ceiling, suddenly very interested in the chandelier. My assets are actually all tied up in escrow right now, he muttered, avoiding Vanessa's gaze. Illiquid. You know how it is. Vanessa whipped her head toward him, her mouth falling open in betrayal as she realized she was alone. I laughed, a real genuine laugh. Good luck with that, Vanessa. I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked toward the exit. I could hear Vanessa shouting my name, her voice shrill and desperate. I heard her arguing with the waiter, heard Mark trying to stammer an excuse. But their voices faded as I pushed through the heavy oak doors of the restaurant. Outside, the air was cool and fresh. I walked 2 blocks to my rattling 2012 sedan. It sat there under the street lamp, rust spots and all. I got in, turned the key, and listened to the engine struggle to life. It didn't bother me anymore. I patted the dashboard affectionately. I would buy a new car tomorrow. But tonight, as I drove away from L'Orangerie, leaving my past in the rearview mirror, I felt richer than I ever had in my life. And it had nothing to do with the money. I was free.